All right, as folks are coming in, we're gonna give folks just one more minute here, real quick, as everybody starts joining us for our webinar today on disaster preparedness for caregivers, and then we'll get rocking and rolling pretty soon here. Okay, it looks like our attendees have kind of slowed down a little bit, so let's get started. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our next webinar in the disaster preparedness series from the Region 7 Disaster Health Response Ecosystem. I've got a couple of quick slides to go through here, and then we will turn it over to Leslie. So we can see we're here today for our Caregiver Disaster Preparedness webinar. Couple of housekeeping items, just the description about our webinar that we've all kind of seen and talked about with signing up for this. Looking at our objectives for today for the webinar. We do have continuing education available to folks for our physicians, nurses, and EMS. We'll have instructions for how to do or to obtain that, both here in a second, as well as I'll put it in the chat for folks, and then when things get emailed out later on, we'll do that. You'll see that as well. Disclosures for what we have as far as anybody associated with the R7 DHRE. We do encourage everybody to utilize the Q&A. It should be located at the bottom of your screen there. That way we can kind of prioritize questions and make sure we flow through, get through all of our slides and get all the topics covered. For those of you who are going to partake in some of the continuing education, you'll go to this website here and enter the activity code. I believe there's also a short survey that you'll need to fill out, and we'll again, I'll put this all in the chat and we'll have it included with things afterwards. Other than that, those are all the disclosures that I have. So it is my pleasure today to introduce Leslie Poole. Leslie is a lifelong resident of Americus, Georgia. She holds certifications as a certified peer specialist and a certified psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner, as well as a degree in psychology. Leslie's has past experience in developing, innovating, and implementing programs for crisis resolution within the mental health community. Leslie is currently the Program Innovation Manager at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. Here she continues her work in the ongoing implementation of evidence-based programs, as well as being responsible for developing strategic initiative to advance the RCI's mission through opportunity proposals, content and program development, and training to aid in supporting caregivers and their loved ones. More recently, Leslie has worked with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs and FEMA in the development of disaster preparedness toolkits for caregivers. Leslie has also worked on the implementation and evolution of RCI's Operation Family Caregiver and RCI Reach programs, as well as development of RCI's virtual empathy training, Operation Caregiver Support, and military caregiver webinar series. In her overabundance, I'm sure, of free time, Leslie does like to spend that free time with her family. And so with that, I will turn it over to Leslie.
I mean, man, what an intro. I don't know what I could do with that. All right. Hello, everyone. If you are in this room, you are here to partake in a presentation by yours truly. My name is Leslie Poole. I have the great honor of being the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers Program Innovation Manager. If you ask any of my colleagues, they will tell you that I tell everyone I have the best job in the entire world, and I truly believe that. I get to work every day to help family caregivers thrive in their what can be often a long and difficult journey. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. If we can bear with me for a second, technology, we're going to see how she works today. And it looks like she likes me. Everybody can see that. All right. So, if you're here today, you're here to learn about preparing your caregivers and really the significance of family caregivers in your emergency response ecosystem. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm only going to ask you to do two things. I know I come directly on the screen. I'm going to ask you to do two things for me, but I promise I come bearing gifts, free gifts for you to have and for you to help you in your disaster preparedness in your community and those that you work with. So to get started, here's the ask. We at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers are really big on being data driven and also making sure that our trainings are by the people that need them for the people that need them. So what caregivers need to know, what you need to know in your disaster response world, we want to know. We want to know how we're doing and how this training is going. This training was funded by our gracious Daniel P. Amos Family Foundation out of the Columbus, Georgia area. They truly believe that we need to build a bridge between family caregivers in our community and also our emergency response aging network so we can better learn how to recover and respond to disasters and be more prepared. So I don't know if I can do this, but I might can put this in the chat. Please don't hate me. If you do not want to scan it, that's fine, but just optional for you. So as you're scanning that, as you're taking this, kind of finding out what we're doing here in your world of disaster preparedness, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers, a little bit about why it's so important and why we are here today to really learn about this topic in particular. So I would be really remiss if I did not quote our founder, former First Lady, Mrs. Carter. The things I'm going to tell you today, the activities that I'm going to tell you that we did and what caregivers need in order to be better prepared for disasters, I'm going to tell you it's not mind-blowing. I'm not going to blow your mind with new things, okay? I'm not. I try a lot, but I'm not. Instead, what I'm going to try to do is show you the main barriers that caregivers go through in a disaster and really pitch it to you from the perspective of a caregiver and what it feels like to them to go through these things and to have these things happen. Okay, I'm also going to tell you 3 ways in which you can navigate those barriers, very simple ways. Again, I'm not out to reinvent the wheel. I'm not out to blow your mind. I just want to give you some simple ways we found to navigate that in our work with FEMA and with the VA and how we work in very complicated, often hard, sometimes difficult to navigate systems. So Mrs. Carter really believes she learned at the age of 12 when her father, Mr. Smith, was diagnosed with a terminal form of leukemia. She had to watch her mother care for him, and she in turn had to care for all of her brothers and sisters in her household task and making sure that everybody was able to get what they needed. She also did the same thing when her grandfather moved into her home, and she had to take care of him and also her siblings and make sure her mother was supported at that time. So caregiving was a lifelong passion for Mrs. Carter, and she truly believed that we are only one of 4 kinds of people. We are those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers now, those who will be caregivers in the future, and those who will need them. So it's important when we go through this presentation, you understand that this might not be you today. You might not think this is a big deal in your population, but eventually one of these 4 kinds is what you're going to be, what I'm going to be, what we're all going to be. So to tell you a little bit more about exactly what we do at the Institute, because that's probably a curious question, we develop programs and content for a variety of different topics really relating to family caregivers and their needs. We're very data driven, so that means that all of the things that we bring into the atmosphere, the ecosystem, really come from caregivers in our research. So we at RCI, as you're going to hear me refer to it from now on, the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers can be a mighty long word, so we're going to shorten it to RCI. Love our acronyms. So we at RCI really truly work to promote the health, strength, and resiliency of family caregivers at any stage of their journey. And it's important for you to know that we very loosely define caregivers as simply someone that provides care to anyone that is ill, aging, or disabled, no matter what kind of care that is. It could be emotional support or it could be activities of daily living. Those are all caregiving tasks, and we want to count you among our group and make you feel welcome and feel like you can have the services, resources, and support that you need. Okay, now I've told you all of that. Let's talk about family caregivers and disasters. So I'm going to tell you, during Hurricane Michael, RCI got a really cool opportunity, I say cool, to really learn about what caregivers experience during a disaster. We were able to volunteer at our local emergency command center. We were able to kind of see the logistics of everything that goes around, how we stand down, why we stand down, who answers the 911 calls, and what happens during that time. We got really, really curious, and we wanted to find out what kind of calls are we getting? What kind of people really need help during times of disaster, when you have to stand down, when the winds are over 40 miles an hour, or the streets are flooded, or you're working on other bigger priorities. So we found out through that a lot of the people that called in were family caregivers. They were struggling because they weren't adequately prepared, and now they were kind of dealing with some of those consequences and trying to figure out the best path forward and what that support means. After Hurricane Michael, we worked really hard to get some funding so that we could partner with the Duke University School of Medicine. And we wanted to bring this question to them. What happens for family caregivers in times of disaster? What does that mean for them? And what we found was really startling. Duke University School of Medicine came back to us and they said, hey, we can't find anything. All current literature regarding disaster, emergency response, recovery, anything that has to deal with a disaster, we can't find anything that has the voice of a family caregiver. We can't find anything that really talks about their experience. So together with the Duke University School of Medicine, we were able to publish a landmark paper in which we actively engaged with, interviewed, and really looked at caregiving through the lens of a natural disaster and also COVID-19. We found that not only are they not included in literature, that sometimes it takes us a while to kind of understand what that means for them. So caregiving is not a topic that's readily on everybody's radar. I know that. So when it comes to times of response and disaster, we found that a lot of times caregivers get overlooked, or they get missed, or that they don't themselves acknowledge that they're caregivers. So it's really hard to include them on what they need as far as preparedness and response. So we thought this was an excellent opportunity for us at RCI. We were founded in 1987, so we have decades and decades of experience in really looking at the activities and journey of a family caregiver. So we thought this would be a way to combine two worlds. And ultimately at the end, our thinking is that if you're better prepared for emergencies, for disasters, whether that be in your home or community, then your recovery and your long-term health is ultimately better. You're not missing medication appointments. You're not missing doctor's appointments because you're trying to figure everything out in terms of recovering from a disaster. You're not having to navigate some hard logistics with that. We wanted to make sure that we built a bridge to two worlds. We also, during that time, were experiencing COVID-19. Everybody knows COVID-19. Here I am in the virtual world. We're still here. And what we found out that COVID-19 did not excuse me, I'm going to get it together today. We found out that COVID-19 did not have the voice of the caregiver in any of the articles, research, or any of the scientific studies that were coming out. And what we found through that lens is that not only does it take a long time, but for caregivers to really experience that, but it takes us a long time as professionals in the field to understand what that's like, to be able to really navigate those barriers. So for us, we want to bring together two worlds that normally aren't brought together. That's not very much a perspective. Caregiving is a very hard population to crack into, to navigate, and to really understand because it's so varied. But caregiving is very important. It should be considered a social a health I told you guys I'm gonna get it together today. A social determinant of health. And I'm gonna put that in perspective for you. So for my state, I live in Georgia. I am a hometown girl of the Carters. I live in their county, and I feel very privileged to have done that my entire life. But I'm going to tell you that in Georgia, and according to the CDC, so this is Center for Disease Control, we know that 1 in 5 adults are caregivers. So if I can break that down to the population of Georgia, I know that in Georgia right now, our population sits somewhere between 2.2 million. So if I do some quick math, if I calculate that, that really means we have, millions of caregivers in our state and in our country. We also know from the CDC that 1 in 6 adults expect to become caregivers within the next 2 years. So this is something that everybody is going to have to experience in their lifetime. Everybody's going to have to navigate. And it's important that we realize kind of the depth and breadth of what caregiving is, especially unpaid caregivers that are in that role of really providing health care that you can't get in a healthcare system. So I always pitch it to people like this. So imagine you have all your family caregivers, and they all decide on the same day, today's not the day. We're going to stand down. We're not going to do it. That's millions of people in my state alone that would flood our healthcare system. And our healthcare system, as fragile as it is, we're still trying to get through COVID-19. It would not be able to survive. We would not have enough beds, enough doctors and nurses, enough aging network support systems or resources. We just wouldn't be able to survive without our family caregivers. And they provide around $36 billion of unpaid care, which is valued at $600 billion. So this is very much an unpaid force that puts in so much work. So now that I've set the stage, right? We're all here. I've set the stage. Come on, slide. All right. Let's talk about barriers when it comes to caregivers and disasters. Now, I've told you how important being a caregiver is and recognizing those family caregivers. I'm going to tell you the best way that I think about disasters and disaster preparedness when it comes to a family caregiver is to recognize that they're a 2-for-1 deal, which means that if you are not targeting a family caregiver in a way that also includes their care recipient, the likelihood of them taking action to prepare adequately is not going to happen. Okay? They are a 2-for-1 deal or a BOGO deal, if you like little terminology. They're a 2-for-1. You will never have one without the other. They have to be included in a dyad. That means that we have to really look at the dyad and then look at who is the most vulnerable, who is needing the most care, the care recipient, and how do you prepare them so that their caregiver is prepared. So I'm telling you all this, and I know that for some of my emergency managers, when I spit out numbers and start talking about preparedness and what you do in your community, they get a little nervous because, oh, that's a big deal. There's lots of numbers behind that. That's lots of hours of care. I'm going to put you all at ease and tell you that when we did our research with the Duke University, we found out that a lot of caregivers, even though preparedness efforts were not really targeted toward them, they did do some of them. All right. So they're not totally not preparing. They're just doing some preparedness efforts and the preparedness efforts that they can control. But they also very much recognize that those preparedness needs are not focused on their care recipient. So when it gets to that point where they realize that their preparedness isn't going to help their care recipient, that's where they stop, okay? So it's important that we recognize that the cross section of that, they do some kind of preparedness. They do some very small limited efforts when it comes to being prepared for an emergency. But family caregivers are really unique regarding how they prepare, not only for themselves, but also for their care recipients. There's a lot of things that go into that. So I'm going to go through some common barriers. I'm going to tell you that sounds very doom and gloomy. I'm not a doom and gloomy person, if you can't tell already. So I'm going to go through, I would call the top 3 barriers that we found in our research. And then I'm going to give you the top 3 solutions for those barriers. And then I come bearing a gift for you. So with that, let's go through our first barrier. All right, so advanced medical preparations. And I'm going to tell you that all of these barriers are very obvious, right? They're things that you probably hear in your preparedness world a lot, okay? This is nothing new. But again, I'm going to pitch it to you from the perspective of a caregiver and what they have to do, because they are the ones that are boots on the ground that are really helping our care recipients make it through a disaster whole, healthy, ready to recover in a very holistic way. All right. So when we talk about advanced medical preparations, we talk about the usual. We talk about medication refills. We talk about special nutritional items, but we also have to make sure it's sufficient battery power so we can continue to operate medical devices. It's also planning and logistics of potential evacuations. And when we think about that, that's a lot of logistics that have to be in play. That's a lot of things that have to go right in a time where nothing is going right, right? So, right. So when we go through disasters, that's an uncontrollable thing. You in your world, you cannot control those. But with caregivers, when they look at that and having to kind of navigate that, it's very overwhelming for them. So there's a lot of logistics at play when we do that. And it's not only do we need to evacuate, do we have everything to evacuate? Is this a safe place for my care recipient to go? Is this going to be a place that's going to keep us all healthy, all safe, or is this going to be more triggering, more stressful? I come from a very rural community. So when I talk about all of these barriers, I talk about it from the perspective of you're already in a very small community. I live in a food desert. I also live in a very agrocentric economic system. So lots of farmland, lots of wooded areas. My hospital in 2007 was completely demolished by a tornado. And I will tell you that that was very devastating to us as a community, being in a small community, also understanding disaster preparedness and the response efforts that went into that. It was a 76-bed hospital, very small, but it was our one and only healthcare system. So when that healthcare system got taken down, the closest one to us was 45 minutes away. So let's think about that in terms of a family caregiver. You need a healthcare system. We're recovering. Things have gone astray. We're trying to figure out the best path forward. That means that not only do we have to get logistics in place, so do I have gas? Do I know where gas is? A gas station that's open, do they take credit cards? I didn't think about getting cash out because I was busy doing all the other normal activities that I do in caregiving. Then transportation, is my vehicle reliable enough? Are roads open? Then everybody else is going to the same hospital 45 minutes away. So appointments, and how do we get there? That's time, that's money, that's a lot of uncertainties that go into that. Okay, so when we talk about advanced medical planning and advanced preparations, I'm going to give you a quote by one of our caregivers that we interview. So I know that's a lot of words on the screen, so I'm going to read it to you so you don't have to strain your eyes. So, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of backstory. So this caregiver caregives for an individual with ALS. With that, she has breathing machines. They have a specialty van. They have a wheelchair. All of this is very expensive and very, very heavy. So they have a lot of durable medical things going on at one time. So she's talking about her evacuation and kind of what that means as far as her trying to prepare. And so this caregiver tells a story about how she knew that she was probably going to have to evacuate. She was getting ready to do that. So she was doing all the things that we tell her to do, right? So you in the emergency response and preparation, doing all the things you need to do, right? We're planning to evacuate. She gets this wheelchair. She has a wheelchair van. She gets the powered wheelchair that weighs 440 pounds. And then she calls 211. So she knows where to go, right? Doing all the things right. all the things. This is somebody that's caregived for hours and hours a day. And now she's having to evacuate. So that's an extra strain on her. So she talks about calling and she says, oh, we're going to evacuate. I have a handicapped person that's going to have special needs. Where do I go? What do I need to do? And she said she called and called the number just to verify and make sure she was doing it right. She didn't want to cause any more stress or make her care recipient have to go to a hospital because she couldn't get there. And she said I kept getting was follow the signs. And she kept sitting there in her car saying, what signs? A sign for God? Is it going to be a specific sign? Where am I going? So I give you this to put it in perspective of what it's like when we talk about advanced medical planning and what are those preparedness needs are and how that feels for a caregiver when messaging is not made for them, when messaging does not hit them or incorporates them into our planning, our preparedness structure. All right, the next barrier that I want to talk to you about, excuse me for a bit, I'm going to sneeze. It is spring in Georgia. Pollen is everywhere. So the next barrier I want to hit on, and it's a very common, you guys that work in emergency every day and really take care of those people on their worst days, you know that it always comes with a little stress, right? You're going to be mentally burdened. You're going to be exhausted everywhere, every which way you can think of. But for caregivers, when we talked about kind of the mental toll that caregiving took when it came to disasters and disaster preparedness, we found out that it was an extraordinary amount of extra psychological stress. Excuse me for a bit. Again, pollen, Georgia gets me every year. So what we found out is that caregivers really did experience a tremendous amount of psychological stress and anxiety. And it was not only just from planning, but all of the phases of disaster. We focused this question, really, the questions that we talked about, focused on preparedness. But what we heard from them really was interesting because they talked about psychological stress, not only for them, for themselves, but the person they care for. So those care recipients that had brain trauma of some kind, we talked to a lot of veteran caregivers. So brain trauma from combat, brain trauma from accidents that have had, PTSD from traumatic events that have happened. The caregivers of combat veterans talked about the PTSD and how it was really high during these times. So those caregivers not only experience the stress of trying to navigate preparedness for them and the person they care for, they also have to manage a care recipient's emotions. So let's think about that. You're trying to prepare, you're doing all these things, it's great. And then all of a sudden you realize you also have somebody that's showing early warning signs. They're being triggered. Their PTSD is at a high. So now we have to manage their emotions as well. And we also have to manage, we also found caregivers that didn't live with their care recipients. And we talked about that worry, especially when phone lines were down or we couldn't get in touch with them. And we found out that it was really high during those times they experienced all of that psychological stress, trying to really navigate how do you manage two people at one time, my own stress, and not let that project on my care recipient and increase their stress and anxiety. So with that, I'm gonna give you a quote if it'll come up. Come on, computer, I believe in you. Okay. So this is a quote when we talked about this psychological stress. This is a quote from a caregiver of a veteran. He is a combat veteran and he lived in Gulf Coast states. So he experienced a lot of hurricanes, a lot of disasters. He lived in, of course, disaster prone area. What we found out when we talked to the caregiver and she expressed it, she's like, the uncertainty of it, just the uncertainty of everything. And she talked a lot about, she knew that there was going to be uncertainty. It was a disaster. Of course, there's going to be uncertainty. But she talked about very specifically her going into preparation mode and how that was triggering for the care recipient. How now this combat veteran thinks, up, we got to go. Things are happening. We have sirens all around. Things are going. I need to get to work. We found out, she said that even though I'm stocking up on supplies, I'm trying to keep him calm because he sees me doing all this. He knows something's about to happen. So it's a very difficult kind of juggling act that they have to do during disasters, and even when they're having to prepare. So they're having to juggle a lot at one time. So with that, let's talk about our last barrier. Excuse me. And I know we focus on preparedness and response, but I feel like it's very, very important for us to also look at recovery. Okay. So when we looked at the study, I'm going to be honest, we looked at what we wanted to do. We were really interested in preparedness and what that looks like in terms of emergency disasters, what caregivers do. But then we started interviewing our caregivers and started doing our research and our study and asking our data questions. And we found a lot of caregivers really focused on recovery. You know, they had been through those natural disasters, and now they're looking at the recovery phase. And then the things they described that were really difficult that added to their stress were nothing that we probably don't hear from other people during those times, right? So you have to clean up. We have to make the insurance claims. We have to deal with the power outages. You know, how are we going to obtain food and other supplies if stores are closed? So they were all very normal things that we hear a lot. But caregivers described, especially those that had to evacuate, they described that in recovery, excuse me, I'm going to get some water right quick. They described that in recovery was almost as difficult as preparing. We thought that was very interesting because, well, you're in recovery, things are going, people are helping, things are doing what they need to do. You know, you ask for help, it comes, and people are cleaning up. But what they said was when they had to evacuate and come back home, how jarring it was. As you know, if you're caring for someone with dementia, your landscape looks different now. Your home might be destroyed. That all is very jarring, especially to someone that's suffering from a progressive brain disease or some kind of injury that impairs their cognition. And even those that have been through accidents and events or things like that, it was very jarring. So they talked a lot about how they made a decision to stay behind even longer. They didn't go immediately back home, especially when the all clear was given, because it was such a jarring landscape that the care recipient was so agitated and so triggered that they eventually, you know, would just have to go to a healthcare system. And that's where they didn't want to end up. They did not want to prepare and go through this disaster only to ultimately end up in a hospital, especially a hospital that wasn't used to them, that did not have their that didn't know their care recipient or didn't know their needs. That was a whole new patient. So when we talk about that, just remember the jarring landscape that happens, that it's that way for everyone, but for caregivers, remember we're taking care of someone else. So that care recipient, we're having to manage a whole lot, not only for ourselves, for our household. And we know was that FEMA counts it's a household of 4. So you probably have kids in the house maybe, or you're a sandwich generation. So mom or dad or somebody else might live with you. And then, you know, you're having to manage somebody that needs care as well. That's a lot that goes on in recovery. You're playing a really big juggling act. So with that, I'm going to give you another quote. This one, she was a lovely caregiver. I really enjoyed talking to her. She was very immense in her knowledge and honest about what it was like to go through a disaster and then to recover. So she described it as it wasn't so much that, you know, our roof needed to be fixed and there was power outages. It was just a sense of hopelessness that everything had changed. Her husband had a lot of limitations due to combat and then PTSD. He also had a traumatic brain injury. And she talked about how he wanted to help so badly that he wanted to be part of the recovery efforts. He wanted to kind of put into his community and be really part of the fabric of it, because that's what makes us so great. We're all willing to pitch in and help out where we need to. And she talked about how she had to constantly remind him, hey, you have limitations. You can't just go running about. You have physical injuries due to a combat situation you were in. And for him, it was a 3-week period. And they talked about how it just was so overwhelming, not only to caregive on a normal basis for all the things he needed, but now she had to do emotional regulation with him. She had to constantly reassure, hey, you're important. I need you here. This is very important that you stay with me. This doesn't mean that, you don't matter in our community. We want to make sure that you're able to do all the things you want to do and not injure yourself. So it was a lot. She talked about how it's just a lot of just hopeless feeling, like, why am I here? What do I need to be doing? I can't help out my community, so what's the point? So it was a lot of psychological stress, a lot of regulation that had to be done with that. And that's just to give you a perspective of what it's like in recovery, because I think a lot of times when I go out and talk to communities, they assume or they think recovery is the good phase, right? That means we're done and we can go back to the way things were. That's not necessarily the case for everything, for everybody and everything. So now that we have these barriers, how are we going to overcome them? So I told you, I'm going to give you 3 barriers, and then I'm going to give you 3 very easy ways that you can overcome them, and ways that you can think about how you work within your community. Again, not mind-blowing, but I'm going to tell you how to tweak these solutions so that you hit your target audience, which should be your unpaid family caregivers that are caring for someone that wishes to age in place, or even at a facility of some kind. Caregivers still assume that role even in those places. So we want to make sure that we're targeting them in a way that's really meaningful and intentional. Okay. So the first one I'm going to tell you, you need to find your community gatekeepers. Okay. That could be some of you in this room right now. That's very important to know. So that could be some of you right now that are here that you just need to connect with other people on. Okay. For those that are in official capacities like firefighters, EMS, emergency management offices, but official volunteers, disaster volunteers, it's important that you know who keeps a tab on those caregivers in your community. Okay. At RCI, we talk a lot about what is a community gatekeeper. Okay. Those are those organizations and individuals that are seen as trusted members of your community. Those are where your community goes to get their information. And that information is often viewed and believed as truth. Okay. So that's important for you to know, and why get those community people, those gatekeepers, are so important. The messaging and information they put out and give to other people most of the time, or a lot of the time, can be in a caregiving situation. That's the truth. Hand on the Bible. I'm not going to believe anything else. So when we think about that, we think about that in terms of COVID and a lot of the misinformation that was put out. We need to remember our community gatekeepers need solid, trusted sources of information so they can spread it. Okay. So they can make sure the people that need it can hear it. We also need to make sure that your family caregivers receive their information from these people. That is their go-to a lot of times, because it's one of the few places where they can receive services and supports. Okay. So when we think about community gatekeepers, we need to also remember that they are not necessarily in an elected position. Okay. That does not mean that they have been elected. They can be faith-based community leaders. We have found that they can be a whole bunch of people. I'm going to give you some that are really interesting that we found to work with, that really makes a big difference in how you put out your information and who you give that information to kind of go forth and conquer with. So when you're looking at how can I identify some different groups? Because I want to make sure that they know there's a preparedness fair that's coming. I'm going to help them build a kit. I want them to know what that kit is. I want to make sure that every family, every caregiver has something. And I know I have a large population with maybe dementia. I live in a large population with lots of veterans. Um, I live near a specialty clinic of some kind, so I'm gonna have a lot of family caregivers in and out of my community, of my area. Some interesting people that we found to work with that really helped us kind of spread some really good information, resources, and how they can get connected to help with their caregiving journey. Faith-based communities can always they we have found that sometimes the most telling detail of an individual on their caregiving journey. So when we know that a caregiving journey is getting really hard, so you're caring for someone with dementia and that dementia is progressing, we know that one of the first things, last things, excuse me, not first, the last things they're going to drop as a social spiritual activity is going to a church or place of worship. So that's going to be one of the first things they do is they're going to drop off of that. So your faith-based communities can probably spread that information very easily because they know amongst their congregation those that are caring for someone and maybe hasn't been to services in a while. Why is that? Maybe because their journey's getting a little harder. We also found that it was important for those of you that are here from the aging networks or you and your community know who's your area agency on aging, your AAAs, your health departments, people like that. That's where people go to receive healthcare services. And that's probably one of the few places they can get that. Okay. Especially when we're looking at rural communities, we want to make sure we know who's in the public health department, who's at the sliding scale clinic, because caregiving is financially burdened. They're not going to spend money on themselves to care for themselves when they have to spend money caring for someone else. Okay, so that's very important. So a lot of times you're going to find these people, maybe clinics that have sliding scale fees, especially if your caregivers are uninsured. We want to make sure we're getting to people that really have probably neglected some services and resources because they didn't feel like it belonged to them, but they need to know where to go to be prepared. Now, one of my favorite things when I talk about these gatekeepers is I tell this. I had a lady in my community say this, and it stuck with me. So I'm going to tell you this, that there is no one that knows your secrets better than the person that does your nails, does your hair, sees you sweaty at the gym, and knows what books you check out. Okay. So when you're looking at how you can target your community in a more grassroots, boots on the ground way, do not overlook nail shops, hair salons, barbers, gyms, libraries. Those are all very important places where the community gathers and they exchange information. Okay. And there are several research articles of the importance and the role that these places play in the fabric of our community. So it's a really good place to interweave yourself, knit yourself in. I don't know, some word like that. So we want to check out all those people. Okay. So know who your community gatekeepers are and how they can help you target people in your community that haven't received resources or services that desperately need to be prepared. Okay. The next one I'm going to talk about, very obvious, very simple messaging. One of the top things that we heard about in our research with the Duke University School of Medicine, excuse me. Oh, these allergies, they got me, guys. They got me. Is your messaging. A lot of times the caregivers did not evacuate when they needed to, did not take cover, did not do it, did not have preparations in order, was because the messaging that was sent out, they didn't feel like it was for them. It did not include them. Because again, remember, a caregiver is one part of a dyad. They have another person on the other side of them that they're caring for. So when we put out information, oh, you should prepare. Well, yeah, I can prepare. Absolutely. But I'm not going to prepare if my care recipient cannot also be prepared. Okay, so it's important that we take that in our mind, like constantly think, well, I need to understand how to get to a family caregiver by targeting ways that are going to help them prepare their care recipient. Okay, so we need to be really inclusive in that messaging. And really, I mean, there's simple things we can say when we do messaging. Now, we did find, again, caregivers did undertake some preparation that their non-caregiver peers did, but it wasn't there wasn't all of the preparations they needed because the messaging wasn't inclusive of their caregiving situation. They very much stated that they didn't feel like it was going to be helpful for them or the person they care for, so they figured just not do it. I'm not going to do it. We're going to wing it. So one of the simplest things that you can do when you look at messaging, especially when you're looking at there's a disaster coming, I need to start making sure that my community is prepared and that we're taking cover, we know what to do, we have our plans in place, is to simply call them out by name. We use a variety of different messaging platforms. So, I use Code Red here in my town. We use Code Red. We have social media. We all love and hate social media. Sometimes we have to use it and we don't want to, but it can be our friend. So just remember when you're posting, oh gosh, no, don't look at that. When we're posting on our messaging kind of what to expect and what to do, we need to make sure that we're, calling them out by name. This is for you and if you care for someone. Okay, very simple. Hey, if you're caring for someone, make sure you're being prepared. Make sure you have your kit, your evacuation route. We want to make sure that both of you are healthy and safe during this time. Very simple. You're calling them out, you're bringing them together, you're saying that you see one and the other. You see both people at the same time, okay? Now, the last thing I'm going to do, and I don't know what's going on with my, okay. The last solution I'm going to put in place, sorry, my slide deck's going all crazy, is to really look at your volunteer network. Who are those people that really volunteer? I know a lot of you probably are in some capacity have a connection to your volunteers. They are your boots on the ground people with a passion. They want to help their community be prepared. And in a little flip side, they also can be kind of your community gatekeepers. They know what's going on in your community. They're at a really unique intersection of a combination of community, I call it, and professional knowledge that can really be invaluable to those caregivers that need them. It's important for you to also know what networks your volunteers are in. Okay, so where's their home base? So do they live in a community? So we joke a lot in our family. We call America's is called the shining city on a hill. Well, is that community that you're volunteering for, is that community on the hill or below the hill? Do they have a higher risk of flooding? Let's go out and talk to them. I'll tell you guys, allergies get you. This is a lot of ways that RCI has been able to mobilize in terms of providing services and resources. We've really leveraged a volunteer network. We have our 4 kinds that go out and advocate for us. So make sure you know not only who your volunteers are, but you also know where their home base is and where they're looking at what they consider their community. All right. So I gave you three barriers, 3 solutions, and now I give you a gift. So if you want to scan that is a QR code, and I can, Thomas, in the follow-up, make sure you get the website addresses for these as well. So if you scan this lovely QR code, it's going to take you to our website. And on this website, I have 2 free gifts for you to download, very easy to print. You can also go on the FEMA website or the VA website. These are 2 toolkits that we made in partnership with both of these organizations specifically for family caregivers. The one on the right hand of the screen is for caregivers of veterans, The one on the left hand of the screen is more for general caregiving of older adults. These guys can help you in preparing and giving your volunteer network, your community gatekeepers, your organizations internally. They can help you in giving you the tools in order to put and play into your community to help family caregivers be better prepared. And then if you want to, again, my second ask of the day, scan this. You can complete the post-webinar survey. Tell us how we did. You can also think about what you learned about caregivers and disasters and how you can use this knowledge. So with that, I'm going to tell you thank you, and I'm going to come back on the screen for Q&A.
Okay. Thank you so much, Leslie, for that. There was a ton of different stuff in there, and I guess want to make sure to remind folks to use the Q&A there, or if we need to, we can allow folks to come off mute if there are any. I know there was one of the things that I always forget to ask it and put it out there. Someone was asking about whether or not you would be willing to share the slides themselves. I always ask the host if they can do that and whatnot, and we can send those out if you're willing to.
Yes, I will say I will check on that from my higher
Okay.
ups because but I don't see any problem with it. Of course, I can absolutely package them and send them to you, Thomas. I don't think that will be a problem if the participants would find that useful.
Mhm. Absolutely. Somebody asking for that last QR code there too.
Thank you so much.
Yep, not a problem. I guess one of the other things that I'm wondering, I know that looking at the caregiver guides, and I've looked through them and everything. That's obviously why we're here and whatnot. Two questions in my thoughts.
Okay.
One is there I'm just trying to think how to phrase this. A lot of the stuff tends to move towards or to be aimed towards caregivers for older individuals. Is there thoughts on working towards I know a lot of the stuff still applies with younger individuals and things like that, but is there thoughts, plans, anything for maybe some more guides for the caregivers of our younger populations?
Absolutely, absolutely. I will tell you that it's kind of I have a preparedness toolkit wish list, making one for younger caregivers. We dubbed them in our veteran community, we call them our hidden helpers. So I will tell you, like, absolutely, we love to make specialized and unique toolkits for that population. Those are also caveat, those are also grant funded things. So while we are actively looking for grants to partner with other people to make new toolkits, that is also dependent upon funding. So I would say yes, that is in our goal to kind of I would say, how do I want to say it? Have a touch point on the major kind
Hmm.
of groups of caregivers and population. So older adults, veteran caregivers, and maybe our younger population is sandwich generation. I often think about how awesome would it be to have a toolkit for individuals that don't live with the person they're caring for, that they're still
Hmm.
able to live at home and how that works. So absolutely, I 100% hope that we can make more at RCI and really help give something to our preparedness, our emergency response and preparedness partners.
Perfect. Yeah, and I guess that kind of leads into what my other question was going to be is I guess what's next coming down the pipe? What's in the works, or
Yeah.
what can we look for?
Oh man. So right now FEMA, we are working very closely with FEMA to promote the toolkit in which we worked with them. We partnered with them on. We are also actively watching and waiting to see kind of what next year's theme will be for FEMA, so we can kind of see how that plays into the caregiving landscape. So I would say right now, what we want to do is we're just kind of doing a shout out all call to make sure everybody knows where these toolkits are, that we made them, that we actually have research behind them, because that was something that hadn't been done before. So all of
Mhm.
these toolkits are research based. I mean, they're very grounded in our research, and also in the research of our partners. So we're making sure everybody knows about that, and then hopefully in the next little bit I will get to work on some other new stuff for disaster preparedness. Maybe younger adults, Thomas. You never
Awesome.
know.
Awesome.
That might be my next little thing if that's of interest.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting you're mentioning what FEMA's next theme is, and not
Yeah.
not entirely sure what who all our audience is, but for folks who may not realize that, it's September's National Preparedness Month every year, and last year's theme was focusing on older adults and things like that. And so I know they've also
Yeah.
done some themes on what was it, maybe
Uh,
not non-English speakers kind of thing was, I think, one year as well. And
yes.
so it will be interesting
So
to see what comes out with that.
yeah, so and I would say, it really, we want to stay on theme, stay on brand. How about that? Is that more of
Hmm.
a good term? Stay on brand with what the FEMA partner's doing, because we know you as professionals, that's where you're going to get your information, right? So that's like top dog. They set the theme, they have all the things. We're gonna see what they do. We really want to kind of follow them along and make sure that, hey, we're not talking about something that's not in your theme, that you're not focused on this year. We want to say that we're staying on trend with them, but also looking for a lot of really other unique opportunities that can help us explore the world of caregiving and preparedness, to add to our toolkits. Also, our research. Again, caregiving and disasters is not really a research focus, and hasn't
Hmm.
been, but they're so important, so critical to the fabric of our community.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in or anything, so we
It's
thank you
because
for.
I'm that good.
There you go. There you
I
go.
answered all of them.
We definitely thank you for coming on and talking to everybody about this topic. It is very much an important topic, and like you mentioned, I'm going to get the phrasing wrong. Everybody's going to be one of the uh
Four kinds,
four
four
kinds, right? Yep.
kinds.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Some point
really
in time.
critical. Yeah, I think it's really critical that, sometimes we get in the habit and we say, "Oh, caregiving, that's not." I mean, yeah, I watched my
Hmm.
mom caregive for my grandma, but we don't realize, like, that's a very important function of our society. We did not have them, we would not be able to thrive as much as we do. So we have to realize that we're all going to be one of those four kinds one day. That's a given. I will tell you personally, I did not think I'd be one of the four kinds, but boy, have I hit all four of them. So it's important that we recognize that, and that we can really take ownership of that and see that as something to be very proud of, and say that that's a journey that we've been through that's really important to us. And I'm going to put my email in the chat. Is that okay, Thomas?
Sure.
Can I put
Yep.
my email? Okay. Yeah. So if you have any other questions, just, shoot me an email. I'm available.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we thank everybody for coming and joining us. We thank Leslie for coming and just informing all of us about this topic, and hope you guys all have a great day. Thank you much.